Alright, hello, mic test, everything looks good. Here we are on Welcome to the TTO. The forward page is kind of unnecessary, the chapter page is blank, so here we are at Book 0, finishing the job. And if you didn't catch it, the name of this the book is divided up into smaller books. The name of the full book is Welcome to the TTO, and this is the first section, Book 0. Finishing the job. The second unseen time war has been raging for over a year now and is finally drawing to a close. Its elusive leader has been tracked to his last hideout, an abandoned hydrogen mining rig in orbit of a gas giant. Admiral Ellis and his city ship have been dispatched to eliminate him if necessary. Asteroid belt of the Hyperion System, January 30th, 2013. 1:27 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. An Atlantean-class city ship starship called Devereaux glided between the asteroids that enveloped its prey. This lonely system was where Ball had fled, a single red dwarf star, the surface temperature of barely 3,500 Kelvin, and a single gas giant nearly as large as itself. Between them was a ring of asteroids, all the terrestrial mass of the entire system. The blood-red sunlight glinted off the rocky surfaces that we passed, working a slow and methodical orbit of the system. I had lowered every light in the chair room to virtually nothing, and was enveloped in the inky blackness that was the view from the external cameras. The only noise was the soft echo of the radar as we looked for other engine signatures. A girl's voice permeated my concentration. "I see him, setting a waypoint." The orange triangle identifying Ball's last hideout punctuated my holographic view. I simply thought about going there, and Devereaux responded, pitching towards the outward edge of the field. The 3.3-kilometer-wide city ship was merely an extension of myself, a six-pebbled plateau of metal, coated with towers of all shapes and sizes. From behind a mist of pulverized rock I caught a glimpse of our target, an old, battered Goa'uld mining vessel, built to mine hydrogen from the gas giant Unadilla. It was nesting in the side of an Everest-sized asteroid, attempting in futility to hide from our sensors. "I've got a target lock," I heard someone in the control room say, and the orange waypoint changed to red. I waved it off screen. Pounding the enormous station with a hail of drones would do little more than waste ammunition. "We're going to dock," I said matter-of-factly. "This is personal." "You're not going in there yourself, are you?" the girl asked, worried. "Of course I am. I'm going to make absolutely sure that Ball is finished once and for all." That shut them up. I put the city on an intercept course and lined up a docking port. The city and the mining outpost locked doors a few minutes later. Through Devereaux's framework I felt the distant rumble of metal on metal. An alarm sounded indicating hull interconnection. The two ships were polar opposites. The 10-million-year-old city I was aboard was still a gleaming white and silver, inscribed with great windows and dotted with bright running lights. We were tacked alongside a great ugly yellow cylinder, coated with irregularly shaped black extensions, and tarnished so much by asteroid impacts and age that it looked older than my ship actually was. Even though at a mere 600 years, it was a youth in comparison. The blackness that had enveloped me for the past few hours lifted, and the room lights warmed. The holographic representation of the solar system around Devereaux faded into nothingness, and I rose from the command chair and started towards the door, preparing to traverse the maze of corridors in my own empty ship, and recounting in my mind the map of his. Being a mining ship, there was little livable space in the original plan, but things had undoubtedly changed since then. I traversed the whole of Devereaux and crossed the threshold into the Gorlau. The corridor on the other side was little more than a companionway, and crossed a room of unspeakable numbers of hydrogen tanks. These all fed down to the base of the ship, where the ports to load and offload the gas were, as well as the station's comparatively puny fusion reactor. At the far end, the top of the ship, was the equally puny bridge. I was relieved to find that the artificial gravity shifted as I neared the center, and I walked solemnly all the way to the set of doors that signified the bridge. They slid open without my input, and Ball sat, hands together, a faint smile on his face. He was completely at ease, as was I. Very slowly and deliberately, I removed a DE.P shocker and directed energy pistol from my right holster. It was the only pistol I had that wouldn't kill him outright. Ball was a slippery character, but we had nailed him this time, and I was to bring him in for questioning. He didn't try to run. "Look," I said, deadly calm, "before I take you in, I have one question. Something that you never told us." His smile broadened. With a hint of sarcasm he said, "Why not? I will give you one question before you take me in. Ha ha." The laugh in his deep gold voice shook me. It was creepy. "Why did you send those replicators at me on P4282? What would that have gained?" "I struck a deal. I was simply withholding my end. I may be a shrewd man in war, but I respect good business." He had me for a second. I wasn't quite sure what to say until I realized something a bit off with his thinking. "What if you were to make a deal with the enemy during war? Would you uphold that because it's a deal, or would you break it because they're your enemy?" He pondered this for a moment, shifting his head back and forth. "I suppose it would have to depend on the deal." His disarming smile returned. "For example, the one I have made right now." He shimmered. I fired. The beam of electricity leapt from the tip of my pistol and arced across the room, shooting into him and sending the hologram into ones and zeros. That power burned the empty chair, and I whipped around to the sound of an escape pod door closing. Ball was not getting away again! Book 1. A Simple Mission. The year is 2194. An unnamed colonized planet, known only as P4282, has had its Stargate inexplicably shut down. Ellis's ship, the Admiral, is en route on a repair mission. 9 a.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194, in orbit of P4282. The yellow glow faded from the room and I relaxed in my chair. In front of me, 2 men sat at their stations. The navigation officer, Ensign Samson Intayer, turned to me. "Jump successful, sir. Telemetry indicates correct time and location." "Excellent job, Karras. We made it in one piece." The pilot, a Silurian by the name of Karras Vastile, nodded in honor. For a moment, I gave no commands. The systems on the bridge blinked in their normality. The dozen members of the primary bridge crew enjoyed the moment of silence. I sighed and began work again. "Corporal Ferdinand, raise the screen, start a scan, let's see where we have to go." "Yes, sir, working on it." Jessica Ferdinand tapped away at her station, activating the Admiral's primary, secondary, and tertiary planetary sensor arrays. 24 orbital probes spat from bays along the saucer section, fanning out as they established their orbits. Everything from biome statistics to ground-penetrating radar scans began to appear as an overlay on the primary view screen's outside view. "I'd like to see this planet firsthand," I said. "Turn us upside down." Karras nodded, and the 350-meter-long Declaration-class experimental Federation ship began to rotate on its horizontal axis. Through the view screen I couldn't see over the end of the saucer section. As we turned over, I caught sight of the planet's moon, a red-as-rust captured asteroid orbiting low. Then I saw the surface, or rather, the desert. For a moment it bewildered me why anyone would want to colonize here. A good portion of the planet's surface was inhospitable sand. Looking closer, however, and with the power of the view screen's enhancement, I saw the rivers, the oases, the sparse stands of trees. After a moment, there was an artificial blip on the screen. "The scans are detecting unusually high amounts of naquita at this location, sir. Based on its size, I can say with relative certainty that it is the Stargate." "And it's in the middle of nowhere." "It's in the desert, yes. There is a river 12 miles to the east." The personnel manager piped up from his station. "The science team's ready, Admiral. On your command, I'll have the shuttle crew prepare for transport." "Not necessary, Bronson," I replied. "I'll take them myself." I stood and turned to leave. Before I stepped into the turbolist, however, the weapons officer, Lieutenant Cherno Vailds, caught me on the way out. "We're deep in replicator territory, sir. Any suggestions?" Keep weapons powered, tell me if anything happens, and put our stored AIs on standby. Yes, sir. "9:45 a.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194. Admiral's Shuttle Bay. The silvery doors to the shuttle bay slid open. The 6-person science team followed me into the bustling space. 2 layers of every kind of small craft, from F-302s to ancient precursor vessels, lined the room. I chose the latter, and turned towards the left wall. A boxy ship, with drive pods, a short octagonal dome on top, and smooth elliptical undercarriage underneath, was one of my personal favorites. I'd found it ages ago, floating abandoned in an asteroid belt. The name was scratched off, the computers were wiped, and the reactors were trashed. Someone obviously really wanted to forget this ship. Fortunately for it, something made me grow attached, and we brought it back on board. I then spent several years restoring it for operational duty. The quarters, contained in the upper portion, are spacious and comfortable, even though they aren't exactly private, and the reactors are usually stable. The antenna array at the front of the ship could be reconfigured into a handy slip-space portal opener, or a good directed energy weapon, but I rarely used either. It certainly wasn't a warship, and I didn't trust the array, or its power supply, to run slip-space for any length of time. The rear hatch creaked open, the ramp descending to the bay's metal floor. I walked in and nonchalantly proceeded through the doorway into the cargo hold, the science team looking around warily at the rough appearance of the repaired hull. Crates were stacked to the ceiling, left over from a supply run 2 weeks ago. We'd never got around to unloading them. A few of the science team, probably the ones in training, were carrying totes and boxes of scientific equipment. They looked heavy, so I took pity on one of them, and carried one up myself. After storing the piles of science stuff in a corner, I unlocked the next bulkhead and proceeded into the next room, unofficially dubbed the waiting room. It was lined with bench seats, cubbies, and lockers, and had a weapon-controlling tube stuck vertically through the middle. As I opened the next set of doors to the cockpit, the science team filed through and sat down. The doors behind them slid closed. I settled into my pilot's seat, roughly the same size as an average office chair, but rooted to a small area where I could move on the floor. I toyed around with some of the thruster calibrations before I reached the overhead control panel, increased the radon flow above minimal levels, and pushed the fire button on both reactors. The specifically modified dual radon fission-assisted hydrogen fusion reactor banged and rumbled to life, hissing loudly until the hydrogen fusion began its steady roar and picked up most of the power slack. I toned down the radon fission now. Radon was a precious material, and its only purpose on this ship was to produce the extra power and heat necessary to make the hydrogen fuse. The ship lifted off the deck and the 4 spindly landing legs retracted into the curved underside. I reached to my right and flicked the auto-hover toggle, then pulled the radio off the console in front of me and announced, "Battle to hell, ready to depart, over." The shuttle bay commander, Marty Wesker, responded to the call. "Registered timeship Admiral, shuttle, Bat out of hell, proceed to launch row. Thank you for clearance, Marty, leaving holding bay." I began to push the throttle forwards when the co-pilot door slid open. I was prepared to answer whatever question that had spurred its opening, but instead a woman came through the door. And this was no timid ensign. She walked in like she owned the place. It was only after she settled into the co-pilot's seat and turned and gave me a dashing smile that I recognized her as Dr. Lauren Hirmera, a protege of Samantha Carter and an expert electronics technician, whom I had become friendly with some 32 years ago. It had been almost a decade since I had seen her last. She was a thin woman, but not wiry, stood 5'9" tall, and always kept herself fairly young in appearance. She had bright blue eyes, and she wore a perpetually tarnished lab coat, even apparently when preparing to work in the middle of a desert. Her straight brown hair was cut short, another Carterism she picked up from 5 years of working under her. She adjusted the inertial dampeners and anti-grav to her liking, then remodulated our binding shields and gripped the yoke. "All right, here we go." I pushed the throttle up to 2% and we nudged forwards, out of the Bat out of hell's custom-sized bay. Drifting forwards, we turned 90 degrees to face the rear of the ship. I engaged auto-hover for another moment, bringing us to a slow halt. Once we were lined up with the launch row's lights, Marty crackled over the radio again. "You are set to go when the doors are clear. Follow standard procedure." The huge bay doors at the stern of the ship began noiselessly sliding open. A shimmering shield took their place. The guiding lights above switched from a dull red to white. "Bat out of hell, you are clear to launch." "All right, Marty, be back in a few." "We'll keep the light on for you." The twin main engines whined as we accelerated out of the Admiral and down towards the planet. An orange waypoint, the Stargate, pinged on my HUD. I turned to my impromptu co-pilot as the altimeter rapidly counted down. "Been a long time." "It has," she replied, her voice graced with the softest of Italian accents. She was emotionless at the moment, still distracted by fiddling with the glassy dials of the internal dampeners. "Something is not right," she mumbled. "What have you been up to?" "Oh, you know, science stuff. I did a couple of apprenticeships in the long night of Solace. Learned how to code a dumb AI, fluid dynamics. As I said, science stuff." "Sounds boring," I noted. "Hold tight, gotta do a retrograde burn." Having cleared the Admiral by a minimum safe distance, I turned 180 degrees and fired full engines. Lauren and I were jammed into our seats as the small ticker of our orbital speed began counting down. "You know, it kind of was," she coughed. "Wait a minute." She strained above her head for the inertial dampener's controls again, cranking up the field strength. I straightened up, the pressure relaxing. "You're overclocking them," I cautioned. "I know," she beamed, "but they'll hold." I wouldn't be so sure. "You forget how much of this ship I helped with. I know this machinery inside and out." "You forget how much we had to improvise to get the dampeners running in the first place. They're set so low because they're bound to fall apart. Nothing we couldn't clutch back together." "So you're planning on the breaking? When something breaks, I fix it. Kind of my job." "I'd rather them not break in the first place. Coming in on an orbital re-entry with no inertial dampeners is a bad way to start your day." "Oh, lighten up," she smiled. "As I said, they'll hold." As I said, I wouldn't be so sure. I cut the engine power as we slipped lower towards the planet, our trajectory altered to bring us down on the orange dot. "Aside from the dampeners, everything seems to be running well," she noted, finally checking over the whole of her control panel. "A decade without me, and you still manage to hold everything together. How do you do it?" "Easily," I retorted. I pulled up the radio for a moment, a shipwide PA. Beginning atmospheric entry. There may be turbulence. Hold on to something." "Ooh, that's a zinger," she replied. "If only you could have—" "Don't bring that up. Don't you dare bring that up. If only you could have come up with those kinds of zingers back on Tachyios 4. I hate you. When you blanked in front of a crowd of 20,000? When you couldn't come up with a single joke? That must have been embarrassing. Go and jump out of the rear hatch. Now." She looked me dead in the eyes. "No." "Fine," I said. "Shut up." The first bumps of the atmosphere jolted our seats. Flames of re-entry licked at the windshield. New burn marks began etching themselves on the hull, markers of yet another mission. The cockpit warmed and the noise increased, overpowering the background roar of the reactors. Any conversational effort would have been futile. In the early days of human spaceflight, atmospheric re-entry was one of the most dangerous parts of a mission. Many good astronauts, when they were still called as such, were killed when the terrible heat destroyed the craft. Even as humanity moved beyond unpowered landings, until the time of reliable anti-gravitation, coming back down to Earth was difficult and tricky. Orbital elevators replaced the need to do this often, but we had no option. P-4282 had no spaceport, and, according to our records, never would. The battle to hell was streaking a fiery stripe across the atmosphere as we careened towards the ground. With my foot on the temperamental anti-gravity plus pedal, to very little effect, I knew at once this was going to be another tricky landing. 9:56 a.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194. Approaching surface of P-4282. By some trick of the mind, despite how much trouble we were undoubtedly in, I had no sense of self-preservation when the anti-gravity failed. In fact, the most notable thought to cross my mind was one of frustration. "It worked last week," I griped. Why won't it work today? Reaching to the middle of the above console, I shut the antigrav power, hoping it just needed to cool down. My second-guessing co-pilot didn't miss a beat. Why'd you shut that off? Because it's not working. Then how are we going to land? Landing comes later, but I know how we're going to slow down. I pulled back on the stick until we were vertical and fired full engines. It was an unorthodox procedure, but at 20,000 feet and coming in fast, we didn't have too many other options. Thankfully, we began to slow down. We even had room to spare. I eased off on the throttle, and Lauren was nice enough to get me a trajectory estimate on the flight computer. At this burn rate, we'll even off about 500 feet off the ground. Then we'll start accelerating upwards. So we have 500 feet to figure out how to land. If you're going to cut the engines, yes. The anti-gravity should have enough time to boot up before we hit. Let's hope so. I prematurely deployed the landing gear. At the very least, it would soften our landing a bit. The altimeter ticked down with decreasing urgency, and as we slipped under 1,000 feet, it slowed to a crawl. I flipped on the antigrav again, and with my foot on the antigrav pedal and the altimeter steady, I began to decrease engine power. We started to tip over backwards. "Hold us steady, Lauren!" "I'm trying!" "Here goes nothing!" I cut the engine to 0, pushed it on the yoke, and slammed on the anti-gravity plus pedal. To my delight and surprise, we slid into a horizontal position and held it. "Whew," Lauren said. "All right, we survived. Now where's our beacon?" "It should be..." The orange dot reappeared on the left side of the windshield as she tapped at her console. "Directly south of our position." "All right, heading set." I pushed the throttle once again, and we leapt forwards into the desert sky, climbing a tall set of dunes. As we crested the top, I caught a glimpse of our ultimate destination. It was a town straight out of a western film. Rows of two-story buildings spread over a flat, dusty plain. Even from this distance, I could see the wide main street bustling with people. At first, they continued their daily business, but as we got closer, more stopped and stared. The bat out of hell soared over rooftops and streets, nearing the center of town. As we passed over the last building before the main road, the town hall, men and women on the street below began clearing a space for us. I pulled the throttle into reverse, and the exhaust from the engines began spitting forth from vents in the front of the nacelles. We slowed, and with my foot on the anti-gravity minus pedal, we descended to the dirt. The roar of the reactors petered out as I cut the radon supply. Lacking the heat needed to fuse, the reactors began to cool, the excess heat spiraling from the engine vents. I left my chair as everything powered down, clicking open the cockpit doors. The scientists rose and followed as I proceeded through the cargo bay, collecting their equipment from where we had stashed it. When everyone was prepared, Lauren pulled the thick release lever, and the ramp unsealed with a resounding hiss. The heavy-duty electric motors lowered the extending walkway to the ground. The bright early morning sunshine blasted into the cabin, accompanied by a rush of hot desert air. The Stargate was now in plain view at the end of the road. Lauren motioned for her team to follow her as she stepped from the rear of the ship, marching purposefully down the wide street. The bemused civilians stood on porches and alleyways and stared from windows as the white-clad procession moved towards the gate. I gave them some time before I came out myself, allowing the bravest of them, probably assuming the ship was empty, to begin filtering towards the strange craft. While they were probably not unaccustomed to visitors, this was probably the first spaceship to land here in a long time. Just as they started to surround me, a bell sounded. I turned and ran to the cockpit in time to see the heavy wooden town hall doors open. Out came a man who hardly looked like he could be the mayor. With tarnished jeans, a brown leather jacket, boots, and a very noticeable 5 o'clock shadow, he seemed more like a cowboy to me. "You there," he said with a commanding tone. "Get out here." I was suddenly aware that, when standing in the cockpit, I was very visible, and with the town hall being a raised building, we were practically level. I was suddenly very embarrassed and was tempted to polarize the view screen and hole up until the science team was done. But I relented, turned, and walked through the ship, down the ramp, and out into the street. The civilians once again stepped back. What the hell is wrong with these people? I thought to myself. We're all human here. And then, a revelation. We're deep in replicator territory. Maybe they're not so sure. As I walked around to meet the mayor, I learned something. These people weren't just scared of replicators, they were petrified of them. Some drunken fool even took a shot at me. Fortunately for me, he was, in fact, drunk, and had simply pinged off the side of my ship almost 2 feet away. I inspected the damage and continued on. The mayor stepped down the stone stairs to meet me in front of my ship. "Welcome," he stretched out his hand, "to Jafashid." I clasped his palm in mine and gave it a firm shake. At the same time, something stabbed into my palm. I pulled back and noticed I was bleeding. "Ow!" "Blood is good," he said matter-of-factly. "It means you're not one of them." "I understand, but really?" "If you understand, you should not be surprised." He paused, checked the time on the clock tower behind him, and then said, "There is too much to discuss, and not nearly enough time." He walked off. 10:11 a.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194, Township of Jafashid. "Wait, excuse me, hold on!" I called, following him into the crowd that was returning to the streets. "Everyone load the carriages, we're returning in moments," he shouted. People began carrying all sorts of things to the edge of town, and loading them into horse-drawn buggies. Well, they were sort of like horses. "What the hell is going on?" I asked. He turned to me. "We're moving. The river broke through an old levee and diverted itself. We don't have the equipment to fix it, so we're relocating to the new river site. Our best engineers planned out the town to make it the most efficient, and we made this roadway to carry our people and supplies. It's a plan that's been years in the making." He was very proud of what his people had done, and rightfully so. "What about the Stargate?" "I see your people are here to fix it," he noted. "When that is done, it will remain here. Anyone that wishes to find us can follow the road." "I see. Do you know why it broke?" "No idea. Just one day we were trying to dial out and it wouldn't budge. Glad you guys finally got here. That was a good couple of months ago. It nearly decimated our economy. We sold this fine-grained sand across many worlds." He picked up a handful off the ground and let it sift through his fingers. "It makes the clearest glass you've ever seen, without any sort of purification." "Impressive." One of the buggies, now packed with things, set off westward. It was followed closely by 2 others. A messenger came running up. "Mayor Silmet, your coach is ready." "Good," he said, then waved him off, turning back to me. He seemed more open now. "You're a member of the SGC, correct?" I wasn't, but I replied the affirmative. We were here doing their job. "You know what? I think it's important that you see something. Come with me, if you please." He walked off towards his carriage, and I followed. To my surprise, instead of boarding the stagecoach, he climbed onto it and grabbed the reins. "Do you not have any sort of chauffeur?" I asked him as I climbed up the side. "I'm not that kind of man," he replied. "I control my own animals." "Understandable." He slapped the reins and the carriage lurched, bumping us over rocks and sand. The 2 horse-like creatures started at a trot and then broke into a gallop. I was thankful that the Jafashians had the foresight to include springs as shock absorbers. We followed the stone-paved road off into the desert. We sat in silence for several minutes as the desert scenery flew by. Enormous mesas of red rock stood in the distance. Cacti and shrubs dotted the sandy wasteland. Far ahead, it looked like the road led abruptly to a forest. "Are those trees?" "Ah, yes." He noticed my wonderment. The blackwood trees are incredibly fast-growing desert trees. We planted hundreds when we first found this site. Many of them took root quickly and shot up immediately. "And you use these to make your buildings?" "Of course not. The blackwood's wood is extremely, how would you say, crumbly when unsaturated. A building built of it would fall apart in days." "Then how do you build your new town?" "We have 2 logging camps to the north that float heavy logs down the river. It is a near indefinite supply of heavy timber." "Nice. You guys really have everything set?" "I suppose we have to. It's kind of a tradition here, building everything from nothing. The first town was created from the ground up with 24 people. That was before we used the gate for trade, before the SGC sent the second set of supplies and people. Those were the real survivors. 2 weeks in the desert, with only their wits about them, and they built a city out of it. We were coming up upon the town now. 20-story blackwood trees stretched into the sky. The sandy ground became a rough, pale dirt, littered with acorns and leaves that had fallen. The road widened and we passed the first of the buildings. It was small and wooden with a brick foundation. The glass in the windows was as clear as air. We passed another of these houses and another. Moments later, we emerged into the town square. The canopy of trees stretched high above. Many of the horse-like creatures clopped around on the stone streets. Just ahead, a stone bridge over a rushing river led to a building identical to the town hall in Jaffashid, only hewn from granite, and bearing an inscription in enormous letters, Tisrego. In between, a fountain sprouted crystal-clear water, straight from the river. Wooden brick buildings were scattered around the square and throughout the woods. "This is fantastic," I said as we disembarked. I began to follow him across the bridge. "Beautiful, I know," he replied, his voice serene as we crossed the rushing river. "But there's something far darker that we have to worry about. In recent years we were terrorized by a scourge of machines, the likes of which I've never seen before." "Replicators," I said confidently. "Not so simple," he sternly corrected. "Common replicators starve here. Without metal to sustain them, they corrode and rust." Instead of entering through the large front doors of the building, he led me around the side. "So what? If it's not replicators, what's the problem then?" I was growing tired of him being facetious, even though I knew full well he was leading up to something. He slid a skeleton key into its place in the side door, and it clicked effortlessly open. We walked down into a dark basement room. A switch on the wall summoned sparse electric lighting, illuminating glass cases that were scattered around the granite enclosure. The scenic value was akin to a dungeon. Mayor Silmet proceeded ahead of me, moving like a ghost in the low yellow light. He came to one of the cases and motioned me over, uprooting me from where I stood. I followed his path as closely as I could. The floor was difficult to see. The glass case, about a foot by a foot by a foot, standing 4 feet off the floor, looked like something that belonged in a museum. But what was in the box didn't belong anywhere. Even though it was in pieces, I clearly recognized the spider-like frame of a Milky Way replicator, only made nearly completely out of wood. What the? I had never seen nor heard of anything like it before, he muttered, but they come in droves, like migrations, anywhere from once a year to once a decade. How do you fight these things? Same way you fight any other replicators. He spun his revolver on his finger, with bullets. He slid it back into its holster and turned to me. "Do you think—" he started to say, but a loud ringing interrupted him. I jumped at the noise before realizing what it was. My PTD. The science team was calling me. Surprised that the signal could penetrate the stone walls, it took me a moment to pick it up. In that time, the mayor gave me a quizzical look. I put the cell phone-looking device to my ear and made a move for the door. Lauren, on the other end of the line, spoke with an air of pride. "The gate's back in working order again. Tell them not to expect any more trouble from it for, the next 7,000 years or so. I mean, this here sticker on the DHD says warranty is good for at least another 5 millennia, and we all know gates survive longer than that." When she had finished, and I was sure she had finished, I responded. "Good job, I'll let them know the good news. What was wrong with it?" "It was locked up and jammed. In both senses, actually. The gate itself was full of sand, and the DHD was all... well, it was bogged down. Like a computer virus had gotten into it. Makes me wonder if it was..." I smiled. The team had worked their wonders again. "Head back into the bat out of hell and write up your assessment. I'll be on my way there soon enough." "All right, I'll be waiting..." Her voice trailed off, then came back, scared and confused. "What the hell are..." "Replicators!" "Go!" I shouted. "Get into the ship and shut the hatch." She yelled something to her team. "We're going," she said to me. "It's just... Ellis, they're made out of..." The signal cut out. The replicators were jamming it. There was no way I could get back in time, and Even Lauren couldn't fly the bat out of hell by herself. But maybe it could. I dialed up the Admiral. "Hello, your friendly neighborhood time ship USS Admiral, on duty AI speaking," Cortana answered. And then, "Concentrating fire on the larger vessel. Go to maximum impulse. We need our orbit to..." "Cortana? What the hell is going on up there?" "Replicator ships, 3 of them, dropped out of hyperspace 2 minutes ago. We got the first shot off, but we're being flanked. One of them slingshotted around the moon, and now they're coming up. Evasive maneuvers! I need an AI in the bat out of hell. ASAP. Can you manage this?" Yes, sir. It'll be on its way as soon as we can get back within decent range." "Get an orbit burn to bring us..." "Whoa, Karis, watch the debris." The line went silent. Mayor Simmet noticed my worried expression. "What's the matter?" he asked. "There are replicators in Javashid." "And in orbit," I muttered. "We're under attack." "Orbit? This is more than a migration," he began with a start. "I'll sound the alarm." He ran up the stairs and out of the basement, turning back only to say, "Come on!" I followed him out into the mid-morning air where people were already preparing. I noted that the blackwood trees made an ideal defense against wooden replicators. As they take the easiest food source, they would eat them first. Then they would dry out and crumble. I assumed this was no coincidence. The Jafashians knew their stuff. And the replicators, being mindless machines, didn't know much. Disturbingly enough, it seemed that this was a coordinated attack, something the replicators didn't tend to do well. That's what was really worrying me about the situation at hand. Someone, or something, was behind it. I braced myself for the worst. 11:01 a.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194, Township of Tisrego. In the grand scheme of things, I considered myself lucky to have so many good AIs on my side. Despite that fact, when I was finally able to reinitiate communication with the bat out of hell, I was greeted with a familiar female voice. "Where did you put me?" she asked, and before I could answer, she followed with a sarcastic, "Well, if it was your idea, this is going to be wonderful." Somehow, everyone's favorite passive-aggressive, sadistic AI had found its way into my computer system. Dealing with GLaDOS in the middle of a replicator invasion was not my idea of ideal circumstances. Either way, beggars can't be choosers, so I politely asked her if she could fly the ship. "I can try, but flying this bucket isn't my idea of a spectacular job. Don't get angry if it goes straight into the ground." And then, with a large dose of her typical self, she added, "You know what? I'll just try to pick you up before that happens." Great, I thought to myself. A few minutes later, the bat out of hell came careening into the blackwood trees above our heads, raining down clumpy wooden shards. One of the thicker trees clipped the left nacelle and she came spiraling down to the cobblestone streets. Mayor Silmet came walking up behind me saying, "I see your ship has arrived." "It could have been better," I replied. I walked towards the landing area, which in this case was just another term for a crash site. As I approached the ship, I noticed that the landing gear was positively mangled. No using that again. The rear hatch, somehow still functioning, opened slowly. Just inside the cargo compartment stood the 2 survivors of the science team. Thankfully, one of them was Lauren. "Oh my God, you're all right." "I made it. Just barely. It's going to be a while until I get this team back to full strength again," she sighed. "But at least I have Ernest." She turned to the other survivor and he stepped forwards. His badge read E. Lockade. He was tall, dark-skinned, and had icy gray eyes. He looked a strange shade of worry. "Good morning, Private." I stretched my hand to greet him. He shook it, but barely. "Sorry, sir, I'm still a bit traumatized." He shook his head, trying to break free of what was ailing him. "I've never seen a swarm of things move like that." "Get used to it," I said. "We're going back." "You're going back?" Mayor Silmet was shocked. The crowd that had gathered echoed his surprise. I suddenly felt myself become the center of attention. I stood tall and nearly announced what followed. "There's no way this coordinated attack was organized by the replicators themselves. This is my only lead." "You're crazy," he replied. "But it's a respectable kind of crazy. Count me in." 4 people against a town full of replicators isn't much of a fair fight, Lauren noted. If we had the rest of the team, I'd be set, but... I cut her off. We're going to call in backup. And I knew just the team for the job. Get in. And with that, I stepped up the ramp into the bat out of hell, my plan being formulated as I went. I walked into the cockpit to have my concentration broken. From the ceiling of the cockpit, hanging directly from the holographic emitter, was the digitized form of GLaDOS. Her hanging body took a place over the center console, filling a good portion of the interior space. She turned and narrowed her single orange eye at me when I entered the room. The following, "Welcome back," was dripping with sarcasm. "Yes, hello, GLaDOS. How have you been?" "I've been doing all right," she mused, tolerating the other AIs in storage. "I want to have my own ship again." "Well, that's going to be a long shot. We haven't built a ship since, I think, year 250 thereabouts. I tried to recall when we pieced together Lucky Number 13 from discarded starship parts. In the meantime, I could hear Ernest, Lauren, and Mayor Silmet working their way up towards the front of the ship. Lauren finally emerged from the cockpit side door. She was being closely followed. GLaDOS turned to the mayor as he walked in. He stopped dead in his tracks and gaped. "What in the hell is that?" The sound of the reaction was nothing compared to the look on his face. "Don't call me that," she replied. "I am the genetic life form and disk operating system. I am the single largest collection of—" Yeah, GLaDOS, shut up," I told her. She had virtually no power here. "I need to place a call." Instead of using my PTD, I stuck my hand underneath GLaDOS and tapped a radio frequency into the communications panel on the center console. After a few rings, the Admiral picked up. "Cortana, you there?" "Cortana reporting. We're okay up here. How's it going?" "Okay? What happened to the replicator ships?" "Well, maybe okay is a bit of an overstatement. We're still here, and that's all that matters." "I'll take issue with that later," I said. I was very protective of my ships. However, I am planning to fly back to Javashid and take out the replicators there. I know it's dangerous, but it's our only chance of figuring this out. Figuring what out? These replicators came from 2 different sources. I don't think... You run the numbers. Tell me that with all the astronomical odds out there, a dual-pronged replicator assault with 3 ships working together is likely? I don't know why I was so tense on the issue, but I couldn't keep myself from getting upset. "I need you to get in touch with Stargate Command. Tell them to send the best they have, and be prepared for the worst." "All right. I'll tell you what they say." 11:37 a.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194, over the Jafashian Desert. We'd been flying for just under 5 minutes when we had our first indication of the replicator's existence, and it was a big one. From the cockpit window I saw a swarm of brown sweeping across the sandy wasteland. "Oh my God, there have got to be thousands of them," Lauren remarked. I kept us flying straight as she stared at the forming mass. "What the hell are they—" "Bank left!" The ship pitched as we rolled and swung away from the replicators. They had transformed into something akin to an enormous wooden arm, and were now swinging at us. They slid along the ground like some sort of serpent before swinging again. I yelled into the comm, "Admiral, we're gonna need—" before realizing there was no signal lock. After dodging once more, I finally realized that we were being jammed. I then gave an order that should have already been issued. "Ernest, get in the weapon tube and fire everything we've got!" Behind me, the tall private clicked open the door to a small cylindrical room, displaying a 360-degree view of the area around the ship. The reticule moved as the operator looked, and the trigger dispensed round after round of superheated plasma into the target. The ship shuddered as he fired, and I kept a cautious eye on the power levels. "GLaDOS, get in there and give him firing solutions." "I'm going." She vanished. "Break right!" Lauren yelled, as they swung a red plasma bolt, relatively low power, ripped into the wooden mass. Tiny machines were thrown as an explosion from deep within the arm caused the creation to fall to flaming pieces. Engulfed by static, tiny bits of conversation entered my radio. "Command, dispatch SG, arriving replicators." I was catching the signals that the Admiral was sending and receiving. That meant that that the disruption was breaking up. Excellent. "Keep firing!" I yelled. Shots landed all around the scattering opponents. Burning wooden monsters popped like corn in a kettle. In the distance, the wooden buildings of Jafashid glowed in the midday light. Yet something was off. And then, as if on cue, one of the nearest buildings tipped and crumbled into dust. A swarm emerged from the debris and came streaming out to join the already sizable army flowing beneath us. "It's like the whole city's coming after us," Lauren mouthed. "Good, it means they're not going after SG-1, I noted. But I was wrong. Over the comm, the silence was broken. A strong signal, becoming stronger as we approached the center of town, was broadcasting on an emergency frequency. "This is Samantha Carter of SG-1. We have replicators in hot pursuit. Any friendly forces in the area, please respond." And then another voice cut in. "Admiral, where the hell are you?" Both Lauren and I recognized it as the Stargate program's famous General O'Neill. How was he still alive? She wondered aloud. The SGC started using stasis pods back in the 2000s to keep their most prized members alive. We're probably some of the only people to ever access them. I picked up the radio. "This is Admiral Ellis of the TTO. We are inbound with a replicator army behind us. We have ship-mounted artillery. You may want to hold up for now. Over." "Understood, Admiral. We're working on barricading the town hall's doors," O'Neill replied. Lauren fiddled with the console before signaling me. I looked above my head to see the power in the batteries declining rapidly. "Uh-oh," I said. "Lauren, give the bottom turret plasma straight from the reactor. I'll drop the compression to compensate. With less constriction in the fusion reactor, I need to put more fuel into both the fission and fusion components of the DRFA-HFR in order to keep the power flowing. However, this meant that we generated a lot more plasma in exchange for a less efficient fuel consumption and electricity output. But now it was a tricky balance. Lowering the pressure lowered the temperature, a high amount of which is needed to fuse. Pouring more radon through the reactors does help. But when you're dumping the plasma, it only works to a point. "GLaDOS! I'm sure he's alright in there now. Give me a hand with these reactors." She reappeared above my head, hanging from the ceiling emitter. The controls on the reactor console above my head began shifting erratically, before falling into a rhythm. "There we go," she said proudly. "I have—" "Ellis, look out!" Lauren shouted. As co-pilot, she only had absolute control if I transferred it to her. She could not, on her own, turn to avoid the replicator's spire that was directly ahead. At the last second, I pulled a hard left. We didn't miss. The tower of wood scraped along the side of the ship at almost 100 miles per hour, before slamming into the nacelle. Heavier than I can control, we rolled to the right as the starboard reactor stalled, sending us into a spiral. I reached above my head and slammed the fire button, desperately trying to restart it. Alarms rang out, error lights flashed red. I cut the throttle and jammed on the anti-gravity plus pedal, wrenching the yoke as hard as I could to right us. The auto-hover was barely responding. We were plummeting. With a terrible noise, we slammed through the roof of a building. Glass from the windows of the storefront shattered as we smashed through the bottom of 2 floors. We clipped a display case and demolished a wooden desk before obliterating the front of the building and skidding out into the town square. The dry fountain cracked at the base and crumbled into our windshield. Ernest and Mayor Silmet stumbled confusedly into the cockpit. "If that didn't call everything in this godforsaken town running in our direction, nothing will," Silvet mumbled. On that note, no less than 5 structures around the square teetered and then disintegrated. Thousands of wooden machines came pouring forth towards us. The surviving reactor gave me just enough power to raise us off the dusty street before they coalesced into a massive wooden blob beneath us, and then began to rise. I didn't have the power to run away. "Admiral!" I yelled into the comm. "I need heavy artillery fire on our position immediately! Do you copy? We've got 1 good shot. Target locked, over." "Fire!" "Admiral, you're not clear of the—" "Fire now!" I gunned the engines and we lurched forwards, hobbling out of the way, just as an enormous beam of red death came flying down from space. A Hollywood-sized fireball and the concussive shockwave of a bomb blast followed it. Whatever was left standing near the square earlier wasn't anymore. The bat out of hell was thrust forwards like a bullet. Ernest tumbled across Lauren's console and under the windshield as we lost control, and landed hard, nose first, into the ground. I blacked out. 2:20 p.m. local time. Monday, April 14th, 2194. Jafashid. I woke up to a banging on the hull, raising my head slowly. I checked to see if I was bleeding and was glad to note that I wasn't. I looked over to Lauren and noticed that she had fallen from her chair. On the floor next to her was Ernest. From where I was sitting they looked okay, just unconscious. Taking a look in the cockpit window, which was somehow still intact, I noticed that we went down pretty hard. I couldn't see anything but dirt. The room was lit with the last of the power. The banging, which had ceased, started again. I could hear yelling outside, but couldn't make it out. A small sliver of light began cutting through the stifling air as the dirt at the top of the windshield was scooped away. A face appeared in the gap, then waved. I smiled and returned the gesture. It was Daniel Jackson of SG-1. I stood from my chair, noting the slanted floor, and turned to wake Ernest and Lauren. As they groaned to life, I exited to the main compartment, found and shook Mayor Silmet awake. Thankfully, there were no major injuries, just bumps and bruises from the crash. Still somewhat lightheaded, I stumbled up the slant of the crashed ship and into the cargo compartment, where crates of equipment were now distributed awkwardly against the front wall. I pushed them aside and made a move for the rear hatch, unsure if it would work. The large square door was warped, but still sealed tight. I pulled the emergency release and the two large electric motors whined, pushing the heavy metal ramp out of its place and downwards to meet the ground. Fortunately for me, the ship wasn't at too crazy an angle, and a connection was made with the dirt after a couple of extra seconds. Surrounding the exit to my derelict were the 4 members of the original SG-1, Teal'c, Colonel Samantha Carter, Daniel Jackson, and General O'Neill. It was notable how little they aged. I straightened up and stepped into the harsh afternoon light. "You took a tumble, Admiral," O'Neill said. "Are you all right?" Yeah, I think I'm fine." I checked myself over again, making sure there wasn't any unusual pain in my extremities or head. After a crash like that, a concussion was a real worry. "Just a bit bruised, that's all." "We saw you hit from the top floor of the town hall," Jackson chimed in. "We thought you were done for." From behind me, Lauren stepped around the skewed crates. "I've been through harder a crash than that," she said. "We'll be fine. Even Kopar's doing okay." "Kopar?" I asked. She looked confusedly at me for a minute. "Yeah, Mayor Silmet. He didn't tell you his first name?" "I guess he wasn't hitting on me," I replied. I turned back around to face SG-1 as Ernest and Kopar followed in Lauren's footsteps. "What did we miss, SG-1? How long was I out?" And at that moment, the glare fading, I managed to look past the team of soldiers and out onto what used to be the town square of Jafashid. The place was a smoking crater, the ground zero of an apocalyptic artillery hit. Sand around the edges had been burned into a charred glass, and the cobblestone and dirt roads had been pulverized. Every building within a good half-kilometer had been leveled absolutely. The fountain, which just hours before had been an elegantly carved statue in the center of town, was vaporized. "It's been about 3 hours," Samantha Carter replied. "We've been keeping tabs on your ship since then." And the woman in command said they're in rough shape. They found a place to land and recoup their losses." "Where's that?" 5 kilometers south of here, there's a flat piece of desert large enough to park a starship. We're supposed to meet them there in 2 hours' time." "Well, we're not walking 5 clicks across the desert in the middle of the day. Pile on in, I'll see what I can do." Just then, Kopar made his way to the front of the crowd. "Oh my." He stared out into the crater that was once Jafashid's center of commerce. "That is the result of terrifying power. But are the replicators truly dead?" Sam and Jack looked at each other before she continued. We don't know. As far as I can tell, they were all destroyed in the blast, but that only accounts for the ones that were here. Do you know how many were on this planet to begin with? No. Sam began to say something again, but I interjected. Once we get the Admiral's sensors back up and running, the probes we left in orbit should be able to tell us, now that we know what we're looking for. I shoved the lever back into its original position after everyone filed into the cargo compartment. The motors whined again, de-extending the ramp and pulling it back up until it was almost flush with the rear of the craft. Then the subtle warp from the impact caused one edge to catch before the other, and ended with the door cocked awkwardly sideways, bent and half shut, stuck just a bit open on the left side. Well, that's not airtight, I sighed. You guys have fun in here. Ernest, see if you can ring up the Admiral again. Lauren, Sam, come with me. I walked into the main compartment and pulled open a hatch on the floor. The stairs it revealed led down into the engine room. With no windows and mostly buried at the moment anyways, darkness abounded. On the panel at the bottom of the stairs I groped around for the activation switch. This auxiliary control had a battery backup in case of emergency, but something was wrong with it. It never wanted to charge. I turned back towards the stairs and looked up into the compartment above. Sam and Lauren stood awaiting my command, but chatting amongst themselves. I wondered how long it had been for either of them. Anyone got a flashlight? I could use a hand down here. Preferably a hand with a flashlight in it. I've got you covered, Sam replied. She came carefully down the metal stairs and pulled a compact LED light from her belt. Waving it around the darkened space gave the reactors, large machines with protruding pipes and wire coils mounted along the walls, eerie shadows. Wait, over there. I motioned to my left. We were facing the rear of the ship, so that was the right reactor. It was the master one, and now had a light shining upon it. Cut into the side was a set of manual controls which I had installed, just in case. Now I was thankful I had. I stepped over to it and twisted the handle, and the cover clicked open. Behind it was a small array of levers and dials, a condensed version of the massive upper console in the cockpit above. All right. Now comes the tricky part. I gave the radon knob a little twist, and the assembly began to rumble. A deep spraying noise echoed inside of the cylindrical container. Before long, the pressure needle began to climb, and I was tempted to press the fire button that was sitting right there. But then I remembered that the console's cover was part of the outer lining, and that without it shut, I was in danger of exposing myself to serious amounts of radiation. I closed the hatch and turned back to the stairs. "Hey, Lauren," I called. "How does it look up there?" "Got pressure," she replied. "Controls are unresponsive, still no charge. Try checking the connections to the AI computer." She mumbled something else, followed by, "Could be sucking all the power." "Sam, do you have another flashlight?" I asked. "I don't, but hold on a sec." She turned up the stairs, leaving me in darkness. A few moments later she appeared again. "Here you go," she said, and tossed a light similar to hers down to me. "All right, thanks." I clicked it on. "Go ahead and take a look at the secondary generator up here. Let me know if it's producing anything." "All right, is there a readout on here?" "I'm not sure. If there is, it should be obvious. Unless Lauren installed it." "Hey," echoed from upstairs. I think I see it," Sam said, "but 0.223 megawatts? Something's not right. Let me see if I can..." At that moment, several things occurred. Sam pulled a large breaker, which broke the resistance circuit, allowing current to flow freely. Lauren, in futility, stepped on both of the anti-gravity pedals, jump-starting the system by force. And I, looking back at Sam, tripped over a bundle of cables, yanking them from the AI matrix, antenna array, and primary control panels. With a heave, the bat out of hell began to rise slowly from the dirt. And a few seconds later, I no longer needed the flashlight, as the power came back on. But because there wasn't any fission or fusion going on, the actual wattage produced was still quite minimal. It was just being created from the radiating heat. We hung about 2 feet above the ground as the single engine continued to hiss. I got to my feet and proceeded to the center console. "Sam, go help Lauren up there. It takes 2 to make this ship work well." She made a move for the stairs, and I added, "Tell her to start the second reactor and get the power flowing." "All right," she said, and clomped up the stairs. I turned back to the console and brought up the commands for the primary reactor. After a few seconds making sure the controls hatch was latched tight, I pressed the fire button. Beside me, the large engine body turned from a hiss to a rumble, and moments later the fusion reactor behind it followed suit. "There we go!" Lauren yelled from the cockpit above. "Power!" "We are underway," I called proudly back, and turned my attention to the mess of cables I'd made. But in moving my vision in that direction, I noticed something that I hadn't in the darkness. The right engine, the whole 30-foot-long contraption, was shifted about an inch towards the bow. The brackets holding it to the floor and ceiling were warped, and some of the welds had sheared away. It was a bit unsettling, but it didn't seem to be shifting too much as we flew, so I ignored it for the time being. I'd fix it when I got home. After reattaching all the cables that had become separated, I returned to the cockpit. The 2 scientists were having a delightful time flying, so I let them be and stepped back into the main compartment, where the remainder of my impromptu crew were sitting. Conversation had sparked up in the meantime. Kopar was talking to Daniel Jackson, and Ernest had started a sarcastic back and forth with O'Neill. Teal'c was looking on, vaguely amused. As I sat down to ask what was going on, Daniel stopped me. He had in his hand a copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and seemed particularly intrigued while trying to explain something to Kopar. "Did you know Ernest is a mage?" "Wait, what?" I turned quickly to look at the dark-skinned soldier. "Why didn't you tell me?" Distracted from his conversation, he suddenly became quite nervous. I don't like to talk about it. I'm not very good." "Good at what? What are you trained as?" "Oh, elemental, destruction, compressing and expanding stuff. Air, mostly." He did not seem at all confident in his abilities. "Have you been practicing? We have the sorcery dojo back at Mabel's. There are more than a few good teachers down there." "No, I never really got around to it," he relented. "Well, I'm giving you leave off the Admiral when we get back. You will hone your skills, okay?" "Yes, sir," he smiled. "Fantastic," I said. "And hey, I'm glad I know." I turned to leave the cabin and check on Sam and Lauren when the guide again caught my eye. The small book-like computer contains a staggering amount of information, and is a must-have for the galactic traveler. I had only one question. "Jackson, where did you get that?" He stared at me for a moment, unsure how to respond. With the unusual tone of someone quite confused, he finally said, "You gave it to me, actually." He paused, a look of worry crossing his face. "Oh, wait. You told me not to tell you that." "Great job, Jackson," O'Neill interjected. "Although you did say not to worry about it, because I'd tell you anyways," he finished. "Yeah, I suppose I would have to say that," I noted in a faraway voice. "If I did indeed tell him all that, then it must have been at some point in my future, and of course in his past. There was no way to tell how far, though, and I didn't want to pry. I'll try and remember that. We just made a time loop." "Yeah, you did say that you were happy you—" "Don't tell me too much," I cut him off. "Learning about your own future is cheating. Sort of. You know, you're kind of repeating yourself." "I'm not to me!" "You know what? Never mind. I'm gonna go check on the girls." I turned towards the cockpit once more, stepping past the weapon tube and through the door. 4:34 p.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194, Jafashian Desert. We were standing in a line at the edge of a mesa, somewhere to the south of Jafashid. The Battle to Hell had made it, somehow, and we were now overlooking the desert plain where the Admiral was supposed to land. But their orders to keep your eyes on the skies were null and void, since the cloud cover rolled in. "This is troubling," Mayor Silmet noted, coming out of thought. Don't suppose it normally rains here, then? O'Neill replied sarcastically. No, Kopar said, a worried hand on his chin. It does not. The growl of rolling thunder echoed from the distant rocky highlands. Well, I'm not standing here in the rain. If it starts raining, I'm going inside. He motioned towards the Battle to Hell's opened rear hatch. Sam? Well, I guess there's no sense getting rained on, she concurred. Indeed, Teal'c added. But we didn't need to worry about the rain. Moments later there was a glint of blue and silver in the mottled sky, and the clouds parted to reveal the descending shape of the Admiral. Like a ragged angel, the battered starship glided effortlessly downward. The thick landing gear on the rear section stretched and made contact with the floor of the sandy wasteland. That was damn impressive. Kopar's sentiment echoed in the looks on the others' faces. Smiling, I turned and strolled back into the Battle to Hell, where the Admiral's transmission was already coming through. The bay is ready, Admiral. Copy? I could hear Marty chanting. I picked up the radio and replied, We'll be there in a few minutes, Marty. Just keep those doors open. He chuckled. We couldn't close them if we wanted to. Yeesh, don't get me worried. I hardly want to see my ship in a state like this. If I don't, something else will. Just come over here soon. The line descended into static. Behind me, SG-1 and the rest came solemnly parading into the shuttle. There was chatter coming from the group, the lowered type used when something was found awe-inspiring. The crooked door clunked shut behind them, and I kicked on the engines with the care of a surgeon. The rumbling carried us tremulously down the red rock slope, dragged us through the thick air on the canyon floor, and brought us into the looming shadow of the broken Colossus. Above us in the saucer section the sparks of welders gleamed in the shade. It was only then that I truly understood the sorry state of the Admiral. The hull was ragged, with girders exposed like broken bones. Battered and singed titanium plates fell away from the nacelles as workers ejected them, cutting away parts that were too damaged to be of any use, even if they were melted down. The shuttle bay had received several direct hits. The thick doors were but two slivers of metal, burned into place in the open position. The shuttles were trashed, half of them thrown into the supports that separated the individual holding cells. Those, of course, were bent, and there were teams already repairing and replacing them. Your men work fast, Kopar said as we encroached into the hangar. The large window at the far end of the darkened, wrecked room, behind which Marty had been sitting just hours ago, was virtually gone, shattered by some replicator weapon. Yet somehow still, that room was lit, close to spotless, and I could almost feel Marty's happy-go-lucky demeanor, cheesy humor, and an inherent propensity for cleaning, from my own cockpit. As the wall approached, I made out his tall, bright face, pointed lock of brown hair, and finally the old-style reporter's microphone that he insisted on using. He was sitting behind his metal desk, organized to a T, and waiting patiently for our arrival. As the lurching Battle of Hell came into its place at the end of the wrecked hangar, he waved at us. Marty, is our bay all right? I spoke into the radio, and then watched him answer. Put her down carefully. I think it's good and sound, but I wouldn't put my savings on it. Thanks, Marty. I eased the shuttle around the corner and then backed into the second-story holding bay. I didn't bother trying the landing gear, and we sunk down onto the metal. With a terrible groan it bent, the structure shook, and the Battle of Hell came to a crooked halt. We left the ship through the rear hatch and left it down. I'd have to come back down here later and replace it, but I didn't worry too much. Extending ramp rear hatches are fairly common, and I figured that I could pull one off of another shuttle. Lagging behind so that I could think, Lauren led the way out of the dismal shuttle bay, and in through engineering. I looked to my left and right. Containment barriers had fallen in front of 3 of the 4 reactors. Several technicians were all over the 4th, working to keep it going. I gave them the turn of my gaze, and one, kneeling nearly underneath the console, returned a sideways salute. Lauren proceeded through a doorway and out of my sight, the others trailing her. I wanted to stop and talk, ask the workers what was wrong, but followed nothing nonetheless. I'd find out later. There was too much to do. The next section was dark, an empty, spooky corridor. Something must have broken, some sort of conduit snapped in the struggle. What struck me as unusual as we passed sealed doors and shattered panels was the location of the power outage, the hallway just outside of section PC-1, primary power control. If there was a power failure here, I thought, then the rest of the ship must be virtually starved of power. Of course, there were other possibilities. For example, the Admiral's saucer section was still hanging high above the canyon, requiring the anti-gravitation units to remain active. Cortana knew this, and could have simply been siphoning away power for them. Yet something made me think otherwise. I cast a suspicious eye on the sealed PC-1 door as we passed, before Lauren yanked open the hatch to the emergency neck staircase, blowing a bright light into the corridor. The shadows flickered along as SG-1 and the rest proceeded through the opening. The turbolifts were too far gone to be used right now, so we ascended on emergency-only stairways and ladders to the bridge. When we finally got there, I noticed the horrific mess. The dome had been torn open, like some destroyed aluminum cap, ripped up down the middle, split by some impact that I'd been 100 miles away for, when I should have been right there in my chair. Had it been a better day, Cortana would have been undoubtedly waiting in said chair, teasing me by occupying the seat only I was supposed to hold. Instead, with electricity at a constrictive low, she stood on a discreet holographic pedestal, nestled in the railing directly behind my seat of power. The blue woman looked at me with a mix of troubled emotions. My entourage echoed the worry, awe, and fear. "Replicators did this?" Kopar asked. "The metal kind," O'Neill interjected. "They can be pretty bad." "To be honest, Ellis," Daniel gave his regards, "I'd say you're pretty lucky." "Lucky?" I turned to him, my face twisted. "Sam saved it. We've never seen a ship survive a replicator attack. Not one of ours, anyways. We always had to bail." "Yeah, even the Asgard got their asses kicked," O'Neill said nonchalantly. Lauren turned to add something, and then a flashing console caught her eye. "What on earth?" As she wandered off around the side of the bridge, I turned my attention to the AI in front of me. "What's the situation like, Cortana?" "Not good," she replied. "We're down one person for every 4 aboard. We've got breaches all over the ship, and we're low on power." "How long until we can shove off?" "Best estimate is 12 hours. If the team can stabilize the 4th reactor, we can dump the other 3. The shuttle bay needs to be seriously repaired, and don't get me started with up here. But anywhere from 12 hours to a day, at best estimate." "Anything else seriously broken?" "Well, we lost contact with PC computer, and the door's sealed shut. You have the code, right?" PC computer was the name for the semi-dumb AI that resided in the Admiral's power systems. I'd named it that simply because of its job, PC standing for power control, and that name precisely was usually deemed redundant by new crew until they figured out what it meant. It was classed as a semi-dumb because, while it was designed to be dumb, it gave some telltale characteristics of self-awareness. Either way, it seemed completely content with its job, so we let it be. "Of course I do," I told her. "Who sealed it?" "No one. As I said, we lost contact. PC Computer sealed it. At least I assume so." "And you lost contact with him?" "Yes." "I wouldn't be so sure," Lauren interjected from across the room. The console in front of her was flashing all sorts of reds and yellows. "What did you do?" I asked. Cortana stammered. "But that station was dead 10 minutes ago." "It's not anymore," Lauren said triumphantly, despite the fact that it had been erupting with messages before she had touched it. "I'm receiving a string of error messages from PC Computer, and they're repeating in a cycle. I think he's corrupted." Well, what are they? Alert, hull breach, intruder alert, power failure, and then a timestamp. Cortana, what happened at 10:35 and 27 seconds? She clicked through her log files for a moment and then responded. Nothing particularly. We were in the middle of maneuver Delta 4 and had just started to vent the number 2 reactor. Did anything happen just before that? At 10:33 and 13 seconds, there was a barrage of replicator probes that entered through the shuttle bay. Lauren and I exchanged glances. Well, I know what happened in PC-1, she concluded. Now what? 5:05 p.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194, USS Admiral. The 8 of us, fully armed, were now rattling down the stairs in the neck of the ship. The power trouble was getting worse, and we knew why. I was leading the pack, C4 in one hand, SPK-7 in the other, a 7-shot standard kinetic pistol. Turning to Lauren, who was descending directly behind me, I asked her again. So you think there was a meaning behind those messages? Yes, actually. PC Computer must have assumed we'd figure it out anyways, but he had left us a way to learn what the issue was, just in case. In error messages? We have no idea the state of the electronics down there. It could be the only thing he had. Okay, right. Now what do those errors mean, then? Alert to warn us. Hull breach to indicate an outside attack. Intruder alert to let us know there's something in the ship. And power failure to tell us that it's siphoning off the power. Then, of course, the timestamp to letting us know when. Great, very helpful. I shoved open a defunct door into the second level of the rear section. This hallway ran above the main entrance to PC-1, and there was a particular spot on the wall that I knew bordered the cylindrical room. I burst into the space to a whole lot of nothing. The corridor was lit, empty, and relatively silent. Then, for whatever reason, I looked up. There was a terrible scar ripped nearly 50 feet down the length of the ceiling, through which cloud-covered sunlight was streaming. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that this was the only light at all. I had been spoofed by the tear into thinking that the power was operational here. At ease now, I lowered my weapon, and walked slowly to the unidentifiable spot on the wall. As the rest filed up to me, I pressed my ear to the tarnished white paneling. Over the rumbling of the 4th reactor, I could hear the distant-sounding metallic clicks of replicators working. God damn it, I mouthed. Then, one set of clicks came trailing up the wall, almost to my ear. This was followed by another, and another. The group noticed it before I did, but the wall around me was warping. It sizzled and began to melt away from the other side. With a start, I realized what was going on. Guys, get back! I waved them away, and they separated into 2 groups, SG-1 at one end of the hall, and Kopar, Lauren, and Ernest at the other. I stood back, and stared oddly at the wall. A green hue began to grow, moments before the titanium panel crumpled and fell away. From the breach, hundreds of metallic spiders poured forth. I took a cautious, stunned step back as they spread along the walls. Already well versed in this fight, SG-1 fired, bursting the replicators into metal bits. Lauren, Kopar, and Ernest followed suit. I was now standing in the middle of an exploding flood, gripping the C4 and staring down the neck of PC-1. The room was once lined with breakers and switches, but now was coated in machines. Serene in this moment of surrounding panic, I made a perfect toss through the hole, and reached for the detonator strapped along my pants. Time moved in slow motion. A single replicator brought a stop to that. It jumped off the ceiling and latched onto my left shoulder, stabbing into me with a powerful metal leg. There was a sharp pain and I dropped the remote, followed by a disturbing crunch that brought me shuddering to the floor. I yelled in agony and ripped the machine from its place, flinging it into the mass that had grouped around me. Several others promptly consumed the detonator as I dragged myself into SG-1's protection. "Ah, now what?" O'Neill cried. "Ernest!" I called down the hallway, my voice drowned out by gunfire. "Ernest!" He looked up and mouthed a, "Yeah?" "I need you to detonate the C4!" He flung his hands up in confusion. I saw the words, "I can't do that." Just concentrate! The replicators were streaming forth still, and we were losing ground fast. This was our only chance. You can do it! Sensing the urgency, he dropped his weapon, holding his hands on an invisible sphere in front of him. His eyes closed and he clenched the air. From within PC-1 there was a small pop, followed by another. I looked on in worry, fearing he would give up. But he had the feel for it now. Just a few more moments passed, and there was a resounding blast that rocked the entire hallway. The replicators stopped flowing. Cortana shimmered in as the hallway tipped, then leveled out. The lights, relatively dim, came back on. I sat on the floor, clutching my shoulder. The blood seeped out through my fingers. "I did it!" he yelled, jumping in the air. "I really did it!" O'Neill flashed him a smile as Sam turned to me. "You need to get to the medbay now." "I'm going," I said. "Cortana, how'd we do? Any more?" "Not that I can see. The power's being routed all right now through the auxiliary panels in engineering. I think we're all set." "Good, good." I took a glance at my shoulder, my vision fading. I made a move to stand, but collapsed further instead. My last words were a defeated mumble before I blacked out. 5:12 a.m. Local time, Tuesday, April 15th, 2194, USS Admiral. Through the blackness of sleep, a klaxon shook me. I sat up with a start, wrenching my injured shoulder. A painful shudder sent me back down to the cot. "Doc! Xavier! Georgia! What the hell's going on?" Xavier, the denobulan surgeon, came into the curtained-off area. He was surprisingly hard-headed for his species, and replied to me bluntly. "Admiral, lie the hell back down. You fractured your collarbone with that stunt you pulled." I grumbled without response. He always seemed to hate everything that was ever done, but I understood, after a long while, that it was just how he vented his stress. "Like a robot in the operating room," Georgia once told me. "Like a grouch everywhere else." Georgia was a doll from the state which she was named, a woman whose kindness knew no bounds. She'd worked for Xavier since he had started his practice, and was probably the one thing that kept him tame. The klaxon rang again, followed by an announcement. "All crew report to battle stations. I repeat, all crew to battle stations," Cortana commanded. "There are 4 replicator ships inbound. Quattro-dimensional telemetry indicates the timeline has been broken. We will defend this planet at all costs." "I'm going to the bridge," I said aloud, though I doubted anyone could hear me. "I'm no good here. Crap." I cursed my essentially broken shoulder, pulled myself from the bed, and still in surgery garb proceeded from the curtained room. Georgia caught me as I made a move for the cubbies, removing my Johnny and picking up my discarded clothes, putting them back on as I went. "Love," she said, her southern accent in full force, "you're in bad shape. Go lie back down. Everything's going to be just fine." "I will help if I can," I returned, slipping my shirt on. I winced as it passed my shoulder. "And I'm certain that I can." I examined the neat hole the replicator made, and the gauze wrapping now sitting uncomfortably behind it. I gave her one final look, and then walked through the now functioning door into the hall, noticing immediately that the red lights were on. Then, finally coming out of the semi-fog of waking up, the reality of the situation hit me. 4 more ships, I spat. 4 more goddamn ships. This is one hell of a day. And then I realized that I had no idea what day it was. How long have I been out, after all? Good God, I've been under twice within, 4 hours? Christ. I started sprinting up the stairs. The bridge door slid open, and before anyone turned to look, I noticed the exposed girders holding up the new patchwork dome. The crew was down by 3, not including myself. Karras was nowhere to be found. "Admiral on the bridge," Vabes called. "At ease. Someone explain this to me." Jessica, neck-deep in sensors, answered me first, her stress causing extremely fast speech. "We're tracking 4 replicator ships on an inbound vector." She took a pause to catch her breath. "They dropped out 5 minutes ago and should be here in 15 or less." "What can we do? What's the state of power, weapons, star drive?" And then with a glance out through the view screen at the darkened desert, "What the hell time is it?" Before the new engineering officer, who happened to be Lauren, answered, Kopar walked in via the single functioning turbolift. He'd somehow heard my question. "It's almost 6 in the morning." "You're still here?" "I get vacation days." I was going to follow up, but Lauren interjected. Ellis, we've got 2 reactors. 4 is at 100%, 2 is at 50. 1 is beyond repair, and 3 is in the works. Phasers are charging barely, and we're out of torpedoes. She mumbled something. The starboard nacelle is kind of foobar right now. We're not going anywhere anytime soon. Well, that's just great. I turned to plop down in my seat, and then, rethinking it because of my damaged left side, simply stood nearby. Jessica, update? They're still moving in formation. SG-1 entered in the midst of her reply. A corvette leading 2 frigates, and a dreadnought class. Since when do replicator ships have classes? O'Neill blurted out. Sam turned to him, surprised. Jack, it was the SGC that started it, I told him, sharing Carter's confused look. Oh, right. I guess you miss a lot in stasis, he mused, never giving up. So, what are they? There are a lot of different classes, Jessica advised. Right, what she said, I started. But we're dealing with a corvette, which is between 20 and 75 meters, 2 frigates, which are usually between 100 and 250 meters, and a dreadnought. I gulped. Ships over 500 meters in length. Made from only replicator bits? Like the Lego-sized pieces? Yes, it makes one hell of a mess, I relented. We're gonna need a whole lot of luck. Whoa, they're breaking off, Jessica interjected. The 2 frigates just separated from the main group and are burning into opposite orbits around the planet. The other 2? Still on a straight trajectory. They seem to be slowing slightly. Actually, no, it looks like they're entering geosynchronous orbit. Maybe they're waiting. The frigates are making orbits? I thought for a moment, then came to a conclusion that I needed another opinion on. Do you think they know where we are? They could think we went down, she answered, but I doubt it. Either way, they'll probably detect us the moment they get low enough. When will that be? Well, assuming they proceed on their current trajectories around, do a retrograde at the periaps. Hour and a half? They're approaching pretty fast, though. It depends on how much they rely on the gravity assist. So they're going to burn into an orbit, loop around the back of the planet, and then pass over us later. And they're going in opposite directions? I was already thinking of something terribly devious. Yes, as a matter of fact, the orbits are off-plane by only a single degree at the moment. Good. I shifted my attention. Cortana, how many probes do we still have up there? Turning to me on her pedestal, she thought for a moment and then replied. 12. Wait. 11. One just burned up. We still have pretty good coverage. Are you catching transmissions from the frigates? Between them, I mean? Yes. Why? It's pretty well encoded. Can you crack it? I think I need more samples. I was caught for a moment and then something came to mind. What about the data from yesterday? Given that they have the same encryption... I cut her off. Lauren, give her those logs. On it, she called, then got to tapping at her computer. Good, good, good. Cortana chanted, the data streaming up her holographic shape. It should be just a few minutes to break this. She fell into a pose that I recognized as her in deep thought. While she was working, I had to keep tabs on the ships. Jessica, can you put the trajectories on screen? What's the status of the dreadnought and the corvette? I wish I could show you, but something's wrong with the connections. And the dreadnought hasn't... Wait, where'd the corvette go? She fiddled with her equipment for a frantic moment. The corvette just vanished. What the hell? Something wrong with the sensors? No, all of my readings are good. It's just... Wait, there it is. How'd it get down there? Where is it? Orbiting the moon? How? I'm reading a relative surface velocity of... I can't get a good reading. It keeps going around the far side. Maybe if we... I've got it! Cortana shouted, stopping Jessica mid-sentence. I cracked a wry smile. Have they burned into orbits yet? About 30 seconds ago. Now they have opposite orbits, and wow, were they close. That's way out of line with protocol. I doubt replicators care about protocol, Cortana, but let's show them just how dangerous their orbits are. Which one should I move? I don't care, just keep the other one spoofing signals. It'll look weird to whoever's controlling them, but in just a minute, it'll be all over. Can you route around the bad connection to the screen? Jessica asked, unable to remove herself from her station. From here? Cortana replied. I've got it, Sam sighed and walked from where her team was standing to the front port area of the bridge, popped off a panel, and began throwing switches. A few moments later, the altered trajectories of the 2 frigates flashed onto the view screen. Slowly, the orbits crossed. "Almost got it, almost," Cortana chanted. "There. Wait! There! Ah, the other frigate's shifting. I think they know something's off." She concentrated for another moment, the ships on the screen nearing. "No matter, ramming speed!" The distance closed, and the two blips entered the same space and disappeared. For a short time, there was a silent elation. "Oh man, they're mad now," Jessica announced. The screen shifted to the dreadnought, breaking its orbit and heading down towards the planet. "Oh, when they've changed the encryption," Cortana cursed. "Uh-oh, how long until they're here? How long until the phasers charge? Get all the technicians in the starboard nacelle. We need to move." "Either their calculations are off," Cortana began, "or they're not heading for us." "Wait, what? What are they heading for, then?" The screen gave their ultimate trajectory, time altered to show where the planet would be when they got within firing distance. Kopar noticed before anyone else. Tisrego. 5:44 a.m. local time, Tuesday, April 15th, 2194, Shuttle Bay. "We need to go, go, go!" I called as I dashed through the door. Marty was in the room just ahead, and I stuck my head in. "Green like the good shuttles." "We have 5 set to go." Whether he knew the situation or not, he was eerily calm. "Have they done anything to my ship?" Someone came down from engineering and ran a systems test on all the small craft. "Batter to hell is cleared minimum system spec." "It better have." I ran off. SG-1, Ernest, and Kopar followed. Lauren was needed now. She had to remain on the bridge. No less than 4 other shuttle groups were already sprinting to their crafts. 2 puddle jumpers, 1 F-302, and a Chikawa-class gunboat, which wasn't really a shuttle. The jumpers, being exceptionally reliable, lifted off first, followed by the F-302. They left and formed a formation, circling the Admiral. Normally the batter to hell would have priority, but the gunboat, the Deafening, got its engines started first. The unwieldy ship crawled from its bay, the heavy titanium plating keeping its maneuverability down. Shifted into position, it fired its afterburners, scorching the area below Marty's command box, and accelerated slowly out of the ship to join the others. With my right hand alone, I stretched above my head and methodically started the reactors. At that moment, Samantha Carter entered in much the same way her protege did, like she owned the place. As Lauren once learned everything she knew from her, Sam understood plenty about the batter to hell. This was good. I couldn't pilot with a bum shoulder. "Sit in the chair and get a firm hold on that yoke. I'm giving you control." "You sure Jack wouldn't be a better fit here?" she asked. "He was a test pilot after all." "I need someone who understands the machine they're in, not just how to fly it," I grumbled. "In a situation like this, we've got to be coordinated to a T." I nudged the throttle to get us into position, then reached over to my left side, the auto-hover, with my right hand. "Do we need clearance?" "We're clear." I pushed the throttle and we picked up speed, engines rumbling, as we ejected into the pre-dawn dark. We made 1 loop around the Admiral before I spotted them. "Join that group," I instructed her, and took my hands and feet off the controls, switching my attention to the radio, calling out everyone in the task force. "Raven, how's your vessel?" The pilot was a Romulan smuggler, Falnor Jolly Davkris, used to blockade running in exceptionally fast and small ships. While an F-302 was a bit old tech for him, he enjoyed having the most maneuverable of fighters. "The whole thing was cabled up when we were attacked," he answered with a tint of triumph. "I told the others tie everything down as soon as that alert sounded, but nope, and now the other F-302s are trashed. All 5 of them. Tisk tisk." Well, at least someone down in that shuttle bay had sense. I switched to a different channel. "Gregory, how's the Deafening holding up?" With a solid amount of Scottish in his voice, he replied, "If you think any hint will dent this ship, you are sorely mistaken." "Glad to hear it." Now I turned to the jumpers. "Samson, Michael, how's it going?" "This is Thomas and Michael, sir. Samson's grounded." It was so damn difficult to tell the piloting triplets apart. "We all took hits. We only had the crystals to fix 2. We drew straws." "Let's hope your luck's hold, then." I finished the conversation. We fell into a formation based on speed and priority. We held the front, despite our heavy damage. Out ahead, Davkris scouted in the dark. Flanking us, we had the jumpers, Michael on my left, Thomas on my right, and lagging behind the group was the Deafening. though she'd become more useful once we reached our destination. We traveled northwest to find the road and followed it to the man-made stand of blackwood trees. Dawn was breaking now, and the beautiful town of Tistrego looked even more fantastic. Nestled deep in the trees, the stone town hall looked like a gem. We made a circuit of the town's borders before landing carefully in the square to let Kopar disembark. As he stood on the rear hatch receiving his fanfare, Davkris crackled over the radio. "I've got 2 replicator probes coming in hot. I'm leading them away. I can outrun them." "Keep going, I'm on their 6, Michael replied. 2 drones screamed overhead, their flights punctuated by sharp explosions in the misty morning air. "Yeah, chalk 2 more up to the Mikester." "You shot down missiles, buddy," his brother replied. "That doesn't count." "Counted as 1? "I refuse to— Whoa! Behind me, 1 more!" The gunboat turned slowly on its axis and vaporized the probe with a terrifying blast. "That was great, but I'm reading bigger stuff coming in." "Is it the corvette?" I finally picked up the radio. "Not big enough," Davkris concluded. "I think the dreadnought is breaking off pieces of itself to get to us faster." "But at least taking them down will focus their attention here," Gregory added. "Keep them away from the Admiral." "Holy cow, it's firing at me," Thomas noted. Just nicked us. Oh, that was right in the nacelle. Crap, I think I'm gonna have to ditch." The large probe, nearly 35 meters in length, entered the deafening's fire range, and was swiftly obliterated. Defunct replicator bits rained down onto Tistrego's town square. Thomas's jumper circled once, clipped some trees, and finally came down over the river, splashing into the swift-moving water. A solid thump came as the thick Atlantean hull struck the stone bridge to the town hall. "How many more like that?" I called on the radio, and then turned behind me. "Somebody get in this weapon tube, and someone go upstairs and get in the mortar. Whoever doesn't, get out. They'll need help if they start landing." There was some clanging in the room behind me before the comm came to life again. "I'm reading 3, no, 4 fighters, 55 meters, all of them. The dreadnought's dispersing into an armada." Davkris sounded shaky. "One at a time, Jolly, 1 at a time." I nodded at Sam as the hatch closed. "Let's get these 4 drones, 1 for each fighter, shot like yellow darts through the sky." 2 clipped the trees and exploded, but the remainder impacted the fighters, outright destroying 1 and sending the other spiraling into the forest. A group of 4 ran out between the buildings to kill the surviving replicators. The Battle to Hell removed itself from the ground, the 3 turrets sucking power from the batteries as they charged. We wouldn't be in this fight for long. The deafening secondary turret swiveled to track the 3rd fighter as it started to circle, sending a stream of plasma in its general direction. Her beam turret zeroed in on the 4th before sending it into a flaming tailspin. With Michael making another pass in the opposite direction, and Falnor looking out for the next wave, I pushed the throttle as Carter followed the remaining enemy. A glob of plasma launched from the rear cannon, a mortar, and followed a parabolic trajectory. It missed by a mile, but deafening shots finally connected with a definitive explosion. Carter brought us back around to regroup on the gunboat. "Where's the next wave?" I called into the comm. "We need to get back into formation." The engine whine of the F-302's dual turbines was moaning in the background as a voiceless Davkris responded. All I could hear was a panicked breathing. I looked up to see a speck in the distance, and the enormous shape looming above him. Michael cut in. "Time's up, Admiral." The half-kilometer-long replicator dreadnought began firing wildly at Davkris. I watched the speck dodge a hail of replicator probes coming closer by the moment. Out of ordnance, he was defenseless. "Hang in there, Falnor! Michael, intercept him! Distract that ship!" The jumper sped off to my right, sending a complement of 15 drones at the massive silver shape that was cutting through the clouds. All of them made it. With a noise like thunder, 15 explosions racked the front of the dreadnought. Then, like a snake shedding its skin, an enormous sheet of dead replicators fell away, and another took its place. The drones were superficial weapons. We'd need something more penetrating. The deafening with its laser turret would do, but they were in guard mode, locked in a stationary position. It would take time for them to switch out, and the range on their guns just wasn't good enough. The ship would be well within firing range before the gunboat could even get a target lock. That's where we came in. "Shut down the guns," I commanded. "What?" Sam replied. "I said cut the power flow to the guns." I began siphoning off all the generated energy into the Battle to Hell's antenna array. We had one shot at this. "Now," I continued, "take us to them." I pressed us to 20%. Sam had more than her fair share of work. She had the targeting console, the yoke, and all sorts of power routing. Normally I'd do more, but I had the throttle, radio, and reactors, and that's all one hand could do. Not to mention reaching across myself to the RCS at my left side. The distance was closing when Ernest stepped into the doorway behind us. "My turret stopped working," he said confusedly. O'Neill came down to report the same. "I cut your power," I remarked. "We'll need it elsewhere." In a few minutes, Falnor! The bright speck that was Davkris's F-302 exploded from one of the engines. A severed wing flipped end over end through the sky, as the larger remain cut a burning trail, before bursting in a fireball. "Oh my God!" Sam shouted, and the ship wobbled. "Do you think he's all right?" Ernest worriedly asked. "I think he's toast," Jack mumbled. "I wouldn't be so sure," I replied. High above the burning wreck was a dot, careening downwards before pulling a parachute and gliding to the safety of the desert floor. "He's been hit before. We'll pick him up on the way back." He had ditched his chute now and was running across the sand to stay out of the dreadnought's firing range, which, I noted, we were about to cross into. A small green light on the console flashed. The array was charged. "We're lined up," Sam said steadily. "Here goes nothing." In the overcast dawn, I pulled the glass cover and slammed my palm on the big red button. 8:02 a.m. local time, Tuesday, April 15th, 2194, Jafashian Desert. A blinding flash overpowered everything as a beam of pure white energy tore through the air between us and the dreadnought. The heat generated created a thunderclap so powerful that it shattered windows in Tisrago, nearly 2 miles away. The enormous replicator ship split like an egg, spouting blue flame and roaring with secondary explosions. Enormous dead chunks of robot mass fell to the sandy wasteland below, the cylindrical shape collapsing into itself, in a rolling, terrible noise. We four in the cockpit regained our sight just in time to watch the end of the dreadnought. We did it!" Ernest yelled, thrusting his hands in the air. The cockpit erupted into a string of cheers and high-fives, as the Battle to Hell made a clumsy turn towards Davkris's crash site. Almost 100 yards away from the burning F-302 debris, Falnor waited patiently for pickup. Sam was guiding us in, and O'Neill was managing the radio chatter. I couldn't do either, both because of my fractured collarbone and because of the fact that the reactors were on the verge of stalling. "The expulsion chamber on the starboard reactor isn't working," I mumbled. "What?" Sam said reflexively. "The right fission reactor is clogging up with the radon leftovers. Normally there's a method to automatically sweep it clean, but it's not doing anything. I think the magnets are snapped from that crash earlier." "Anything we can do about it?" "Shut it down, clean it ourselves." "That doesn't sound very safe," O'Neill interjected. "We are 100 feet from Falnor now and closing." "There's a reason the machine handles it," I replied. "But we can't keep flying with it like this." I contemplated several different options before deciding on one. "Put us down where Falnor is. We can call Michael to come pick everyone up." "All right." We came over his position, throttled back, and descended to the dirt. Moments later, a jumper was inbound with Kopar aboard, wanting to congratulate us for our heroic triumphs. As the sleek Atlantean craft came to a halt, its hatch descended, and Mayor Silmet stepped out in his usual fashion, but with an air of the utmost respect. "Admiral," he began, "you and your crew today saved the town of Tistrego from the replicator scourge. While this may not be the last we see of them, oh dear." His view shifted behind me to the replicator wreck in the distance. It seems our celebration was preemptive. Somehow there were enough functioning parts to reform into something at least as large as a frigate. The cylindrical form took shape, a disturbing image rising in the smoke of the dreadnought. "And our reactors won't start," I moaned. "Michael, do you have any more drones?" "Expended them all, sir." "Damn!" "What about the deafening?" Kopar put in, trying to be helpful. "She's still in guard mode," I muttered. "It'd take too long to get out here." The looming shape came closer. A worried look crossed all of our faces. It started firing probing shots, estimating ranges. The sand nearby was blasted as high as 20 feet when one struck. "Now what do we do?" Ernest griped. We all slowly turned to him. None of us had so quickly forgotten his abilities. No, I can't. Not in something so big." "You can!" A probe exploded nearby. "I'm telling you, you can!" Another one sent sand shooting into the sky, and I could feel the heat. "You trusted me before, trust me again." The explosions were getting dangerously close. "Just concentrate!" There was an earth-shattering kaboom as the replicator ship violently ripped into pieces, burning and exploding as it fell to the ground again. The larger chunks were torn by thunderous blasts, yet Ernest had not raised his hands at all. He was smiling excitedly as the heavens' hail of red beams came down and destroyed the craft, followed by the clouds being punctured by the Admiral's ragged shape. We looked in amazement amongst ourselves. "Someone get Cortana on the line. Tell her that she could have picked a better moment to show up." The ship drifted away and hovered over Chief Srago, the deafening retreating into the shuttle bay. "Kopar, want to tell your people to come out of the shelters now?" I'd learned earlier that when the replicators came within a certain distance of the city, the people retreated to bunkers built as tough as they come. Only a contingent of soldiers, hand-picked to guard, remained on the outskirts of town. "I don't have a way to tell them. They'll know when to come out. An hour or two at most." "That's kind of sucky," O'Neill noted. "Any cross-communication would have threatened the structural integrity of the construction. We have new ones in the works with such devices installed, however." "Well, that's great. The next generation of people can learn not to huddle in a basement for 2 extra hours." Kopar gave us a scathing look. "I've got the Admiral on the line," Sam announced from the cockpit. "Put them on the overhead," I replied. Lauren crackled over the loudspeaker. "Looked like you guys could use some help. You're lucky we got that nacelle patched up in time." "Good going, Lauren!" Kopar shouted from behind me. "Hey, someone owes me a drink," she called. "Come on down from there and I'll treat you to the best scotch you've ever had." Kopar laughed. Meanwhile, I'd traversed the ship once again and was staring blankly out of the windshield. Something was still moving up there. "Ernest, there!" I came sprinting back out of the rear hatch. A shape was pushing through the clouds, approaching the Admiral's rear. Then, about a kilometer out, the 70-meter cylinder broke through the gray bank. It was the corvette, moving at a serious clip and coming in low. I didn't know what the pilot was thinking, but he was making it damn near impossible for the Admiral to turn and fire in time. "Take out that ship!" I yelled. "What?" he called in desperation. "Concentrate! Blow it up! Send it off course! Something! You're the only shot we've got, and this is an order!" His worried look faded away. He nodded solemnly before raising his hands. The corvette screamed overhead. Through closed eyes he tracked the noise. Michael ducked out of the way as Ernest's closed face looked in his direction. Then, beyond the puddle jumper, there was a roar. Bright silver sparkles came raining down to the sand, and the corvette rolled to port on fire and out of control. The Admiral pulled away as the smaller ship plummeted, firing futile rounds at an exceptional distance. Ernest recovered and watched the product of his work as it slipped towards the ground. It wasn't sinking fast enough. Well before hitting, the metal cylinder impacted the blackwood trees with a crash. It cut a burning path through the forest, scarring the woods before coming to land in the center of town with a tremendous explosion. The shockwave kicked up sand as a fiery ball rose high and decimated the landscape. Ernest gaped. In its final moments, the replicator corvette had done more damage than any of its compatriots. At my side, the tall primate fell to his knees and began to weep. Kopar stared with a mortifying gaze as the wasteland appeared before us. "Ernest, you did it! The replicators are gone!" I vainly tried to comfort him. "But so is the town," he replied with a shattered voice. Kopar turned from the wreckage and took a single step before laying his hand on Ernest's shoulder. "You did more good than harm, son. We can always rebuild." "That's not good enough. I owe you all of that." He pointed towards the burning rubble. "Please let me stay and help you. I promise I'll be better. I'll learn my skills. I'll keep defending your people just better." Kopar gave me a questioning frown. "Is this allowed, Admiral?" I knelt to be on eye level with Ernest. He had regained his composure somewhat, but still had not yet stood again. I began a speech that had been prepared centuries before. "Private Ernest Lockade, do you submit your resignation from the TTO?" "Do I? Oh." He shook himself from emotional fog. Yes, sir, I do." I continued. "And do you understand that you will no longer be supplied by or affiliated with the Doctor and his works?" "I do." "Then I am entrusting you." I checked my pockets. Hold on." I quickly turned and stepped back into the battered hell, cracking open one of the rearmost lockers and removing a small cylinder. Silver with a red button on top and a blue stripe down the front. TTO was engraved down the back of the device, and the logo was predominantly visible on the button itself. It was a time beacon, about a centimeter across and 8 tall, and I came rushing with it back out of the ship to where Ernest was now standing tall. I cleared my throat. "I am entrusting you with this one-use time beacon in case of an absolute emergency. If the timeline is broken, the blue strip will pulse. Then you may call us to help." I placed it carefully into his hands. He, in turn, immediately turned to the mayor and held out the small device. "You're giving this to me?" Kopar asked. "You deserve it more than I." Ernest spoke with a power in his voice that I had not heard before. "I will work for you." Mayor Silmet's smile reappeared and turned broad. He rested a hand on the private's shoulder and said, "And I will make sure you are needed and wanted in this community. You will be at my side as we bring the glory of civilization back to this landscape." "Why do I deserve that?" "Because you saved us. All of us. The people of Tistrego owe you a debt of gratitude. You see, towns, citizens," he turned to me, "starships, they can be rebuilt." He turned back to Ernest. "But people, when they are gone, they're gone for good. We deal with wooden replicators all the time, but if that corvette had survived, there's no telling if we would have been able to hold them back. You did the right thing, and for that you will be honored." Kopar turned back to his ruined town and began to walk towards the rubble, motioning Ernest to follow. "Come now. There's too much to do and never enough time. First order of business, new town hall, grander than the last." He waved his arms to form the invisible shape of the building as the pair wandered off across the sand. I smiled as they departed. Out of all this, good had come. 3:45 p.m. local time, Tuesday, April 15th, 2194, USS Admiral. After repairing the battered hell for operational flight, we had parked back inside the Admiral, and I proceeded back to my command chair. SG-1 was beamed back to Jaffa, where they'd left via the Stargate, after many thanks from us. When this mission had begun, I'd had a strange feeling that I'd be seeing them again. But now that they were leaving, it was returning. Perhaps I'd be seeing them again soon. I had a stack of papers at home, any number of which could have been from the SGC, the U.S. President, or the UN. I considered myself lucky that my father didn't go through my mail. That thought aside, I sat back and ordered a direct course to Mabel's. We had to report back on the success of this mission, and the complications that it had brought about. Everything had to be recorded and archived, crew needed to be replaced, and the ship needed to be sent to the Long Night of Solace for serious repairs. But all these, reports, repairs, and recruitment would have to be scheduled. It would take a generous amount of time to get through the system. But with 250,000 people in the organization, it was understandable that the speed which things cycled through was a bit low. Orbiting high, Lauren broke to me the good news. The time drive is fully charged, sir. Excellent. Karras, fire away. Yes, sir, he happily replied. The time drive, a 4-foot-long, football-shaped glass container, filled with the yellow condensation of time energy, began to glow. The golden light spread across every surface, the hue penetrating all layers of armor and shield. This is how a 350-meter-long starship travels through time like a hot knife through butter. At the last moment, the Admiral shifted on its impulse engines. The cloud of condensed time shifted with it, tearing open a temporary hole in the continuum and letting us in. We were now on our way home. 7:10 a.m. Mabel's time. Thursday, September 25th, year 946. Mabel's Cafe. Welcome home, everyone, I announced over the ship-wide comm as the yellow glow faded from the room. We had just arrived at Mabel's Cafe, the birthplace of the TTO and the home of the last of the Time Lords. The wheel-shaped space station, over 20 kilometers across, was our hub. The entire assembly floats in a man-made space-time bubble in the void between universes. Starships from all across time and space, from the Enterprise to the Pillar of Autumn, end up here. We were a background organization, working to keep the timeline right without altering the universe as a whole. Of course, it didn't always go so smoothly, as the last mission was a testament to, but the timeline was stable, the Stargate now worked, and we made it back safe. I'd call that a success any day. We docked and began to disembark. All crew had a requisite week of shore leave between missions, except for when we were too busy to spare it. But with 80-plus ships and 250,000-plus in personnel, we normally had plenty of spare time when the jobs came filtering in. After every mission, a report is in order, and I was compiling the data already. In the meantime, I would meet with the League of Captains to give them a short briefing about the worrying replicator attacks. After a tram ride from our docking port, all the way out in the East Spoke, I boarded an elevator and ascended to the highest level of the main facility, at the center of the 4-spoke wheel. This was the highest room in the hub, and one of the first ever built. The oblong main chamber had elevators at one end and a conference room at the other, with a craggy triangular gate in the middle, the variable time portal. The glass dome above hides an enormous holographic projector around its edge. Right now it was showing a shimmering globe, hanging beneath the starless Mabel sky. It was Earth. The Doctor must be in. As if on cue, the conference room's doors swung open, and out walked the 10th Doctor in all of his glory. "Ah, Ellis, how you been? It's been a bit, hasn't it?" He stretched out his palm. I gave it a firm shake. "Been good, Doctor, been good. Any escapades? Found a new companion yet?" "Yeah, actually, ran into this lovely woman named Donna. Love for you to meet her, but, well, I can't mix my jobs." We shared a smile. It was an unwritten rule that the doctors were not allowed to bring their companions to Mabel's, or even conduct operations with the TTO while said people were on board. There were a few exceptions to this, primarily with the 11th Doctor. Only once did the 10th ever take someone aboard, and it was Rose Tyler, shortly after the Bad Wolf incident. He needed better medical facilities to make sure that the time energy hadn't permanently altered her. "I need to go talk to the League of Captains about something," I said. "Are they in there?" "No, actually, I was looking for them. Cole might be in his office, but that's the only lead I have." "Oh, well, I'll go leave my report on the table." I removed a pair of data chips from my pocket with my left hand, winced, and then moved them to my right. That's when he noticed. "Blimey, what happened to your shoulder?" "Replicators, in the Admiral," I sighed. "Tough couple of days." "Sounds it," he frowned. "Well, I'm off. Gotta get out of here before 9 gets here. Don't want to shake up my time stream more than it already is." He made a move to walk past me. "Wait, on your way down, can you drop this in John's mailbox?" I passed him one of the data chips. "Gonna need more information than that." We had far more than just one John. "Sierra 117, John?" "Ah, yes, okay." He examined the small chip. "Cortana?" "Yep." "All right, no problem." He turned to pat me on the shoulder and then reconsidered. "Have fun on your captain hunt." As the elevator doors closed, I shouted, "Hunt? I'm going home." I left the chip plugged into the holographic projector on the conference room table. They'd see it when they convened this evening, After that, I'd returned to my own ship, transferred all the surviving logs to the databanks in Mabel's itself, and then boarded the Bat Out of Hell to commandeer a ride back to my own home. The only time ship going remotely in that direction was the monster of a starship, the city ship class Atlantis, built by the Alterans millions of years before it was rediscovered by the humans of the Atlantis expedition in the 21st century. I requested permission to come aboard, and subsequently landed on the northeast pier. While I was still sitting in my seat, the entire city around me rumbled, drifted away from Mabel's cafe, and warped off into the time vortex. Now I was actually going home. And that actually concludes part 1 of Welcome to the TTO. As always, this book is a work in progress. The reason I'm cutting it off here is because it actually ends here. There's quite a lot more in the book, but not more that I've written or really written well. But this has been Admiral Ellis of the TTO, and keep staring out at the stars. I'll see you guys next week.